Welcome to Fact TV, the place where every story you hear is real and every shadow you see has a past. Tonight, we descend beneath the shining streets of Montreal to soil soaked with centuries of guilt, disease, and prayer. This isn't a legend, it's history, and the restless echo it left behind. Wind rushes through narrow stone alleys, church bells toll across the street Lawrence. A soft mist curls around flickering gas lamps as the camera glides toward a lonely cross buried beneath concrete. The voice of the narrator drops lower, measured, solemn. Long before Montreal became a city of light and music, it was a settlement of graves. The year is 1752. A coarse-handed farmer named Jean-Baptiste Goyer owns a patch of land not far from the colonial heart of Ville-Marie. By all accounts, Goyer was negligent, lazy even. He preferred the tavern's warmth to the chill of the fields, his mug of ale to the handle of a plow. But vice breeds stories, and stories have a way of digging their own graves. Locals remembered him swaggering to the door of La Croix Rouge, cheeks red, laughter loud, debts unpaid. He bragged of luck, of secret dealings, of a future trip to Quebec City that would make him rich. When he left that May morning, no one thought it mattered. Farmers left for trade all the time. But days later, the smell of blood drifted from the Favre homestead. Neighbors found Mr. and Madame Favre butchered and their cottage bodies hacked apart, coin purses gone, walls spattered dark. The priest refused to describe it from the pulpit. The horror was beyond holy words. When news spread, Goyer's name rose like smoke. He returned from Quebec City, spinning tales of illegal fur traders blamed for the killings. He even bought ale for anyone who'd listen. Strangest of all, the man whose farm had failed suddenly never ran out of money. Weeks became months, and whispers sharpened into accusation. Officials arrested Goyer. The court records are fragmentary, but witnesses said he was tortured to loosen his tongue. Under agony, he confessed to the murders, to the theft, to everything. What happened next is clouded by the dust of 2 centuries. Some claimed he was tied to a carriage wheel and dragged through the streets until his bones split from his flesh. Others insisted he was bound to a wooden wheel, beaten until every bone shattered, left beneath the sun to die. Either way, the sentence was not death alone, it was humiliation. When it was done, they buried what remained of him with a blood-red cross driven into the earth. Locals said the soil there never grew green again. The cross that would not rest. Centuries later, that same land would shift and change. Streets would rise where fields once breathed. By 1969, Montreal widened Dorchester Boulevard, today's René Lévesque. Workers moved the crimson-stained cross to the side of the road. But they did not move the body. Jean-Baptiste Goyer's bones remain somewhere beneath the asphalt, sealed under the weight of tires and time. Some say every vehicle that passes above him carries a trace of that old curse rubber on pavement, like nails across a coffin lid. And above that ground, the land would soon be given a new purpose, the Motherhouse of the Grey Nuns. Where blood once soaked the earth, prayers would now echo. In the late 19th century, masons laid foundation stones for a vast H-shaped building. Its central chapel pierced the skyline with pale spires. The nuns believed they were consecrating the soil, purifying what lay beneath. But Montreal's ground has memory. It remembers screams as easily as hymns. The story of Goyer's curse did not die with him. Children whispered that at night, the tavern ghost still staggered along Dorchester Boulevard, dragging invisible chains. Carters avoided that stretch after sunset. One legend claimed that when the first cornerstone of the new convent was laid, the Red Cross reappeared in the mud beside it, stained as if freshly painted. The sisters prayed over it, sprinkled holy water, and buried it again. But faith can seal a grave only so long. As decades passed, Montreal grew into a city of marble and smoke. Above Goyer's restless remains, another story began, that of Marie Marguerite Duville and her order of Grey Nuns, women sworn to charity and service. Yet, the irony was cruel. The foundation of their sanctuary sat on the bones of a murderer. Beneath the hymns, the ground still whispered. Imagine standing there today, the spot where Dorchester once narrowed, where now traffic murmurs endlessly. Close your eyes. You might hear the shuffle of hooves, the creak of a wheel, a cry muffled by centuries. That is the sound of Montreal's oldest secret, a farmer's curse bound forever to a convent's walls. The year turns backward now from the gallows of 1752 to the cradle of 1701. A child is born in Varennes, a small settlement 30 minutes east of Montreal. Her name, Marie Marguerite Dufros de la Gemeraille. The midwife called her delicate, almost translucent, a face too pale for life in New France. Between frost-bitten winters and the smell of wet pine, Marguerite grew under the gaze of the Ursuline order. At 11, she was sent to Quebec City to study under the nuns, where silence was a virtue and obedience a weapon. There she learned that mercy was not soft, it was disciplined. When she returned home at 13, she carried the tone of a teacher and the eyes of one who had already confessed too much. At 21, she married François Duville. History paints him as a merchant, but debts and scandal stalked him like wolves. He drank, gambled, and dealt in the buying and selling of human beings, slaves recorded in brittle parchments as property. The Duville family's name appears again and again in the ledgers of New France. Philippe Duville, Pierre Duville, each listing men and women they owned. To them, the enslaved were coin, not souls. And Marguerite, she accepted those gifts and even inherited 2 slaves after her husband's death. One was a Sioux woman, another an indigenous servant whose name the documents never bothered to record. Her faith, however, demanded redemption. She wore the weight of sin like a mantle. She prayed longer, fasted harder, donated more. Grief joined her devotion, 6 children born, 4 lost before their first steps. By 1730, Francois was dead, and Marguerite was a widow with 2 sons destined for the priesthood. On the last night of 1737, in a cold Montreal parlor lit by 1 candle, she formed a secret society of women. They called themselves the Sisters of Charity. Their mission was simple: to serve the poor, the sick, the dying. Their habit, a modest gray wool frock, would later give them their public name, the Grey Nuns. But service has its shadows. Within the walls of the Hôpital Général of Montreal, where the Grey Nuns worked, the labor of enslaved and imprisoned people echoed against stone corridors. Men and women in chains scrubbed floors, washed linens, and served food to patients who never knew their names. Historian William Henry Foster wrote that prisoners were confined in cells by night and forced into domestic work by day, their penance measured in sweat. In 1765, a fire swept through the old port, consuming the hospital and 5 blocks around it. The Grey Nuns watched as the flames devoured their chapel roof and the bodies of 3 who could not flee. 215 families were left homeless. When the ashes cooled, the sisters saw in them a sign of purification, but the city saw only ruin. Marie Marguerite Duville died in 1771, believing her order had saved the souls of Montreal. Yet behind her halo lay a trail of unmarked graves and unpaid debts to the enslaved whose labor built her legacy. After her death, the Grey Nuns expanded with the British Crown's approval, their mission growing westward along colonial routes. They followed the soldiers and settlers, opening schools and hospitals from Ontario to Manitoba and beyond. They spoke of charity, but brought with them a different kind of conversion. For the Indigenous peoples of Canada, the Grey Nuns' arrival often meant the erasure of language, culture, and name. Their rosaries jingled like keys in a prison. Their lessons taught obedience in place of identity. And the ghosts of those first students still whisper in languages the nuns forbade. By the mid-1800s, a new building rose over the very land that once held Jean-Baptiste Goyet's Red Cross. It would be called the Motherhouse, a monument of charity built on murderous soil. Architect Victor Bourgeot envisioned an 8-shaped complex with a chapel at its heart. The Grey Nuns believed they were raising a temple to salvation. They did not realize they were also building a tomb. In the crypt below, they laid to rest those who died in service, nuns taken by disease, orphans claimed by hunger, and later, victims of fire. The air grew thick with incense and lime, and the stone began to remember. Above, in the sunlit chapel, they sang of mercy. Below, in the dark, mercy had another name, silence. Generations later, locals would say that each time the chapel bells rang, the earth beneath the Motherhouse shifted ever so slightly, as if turning in its sleep. When the choir chanted, a low moan rose from below the ghost of the murderer, and the ghosts of his inheritance joined in a choir of the damned. Thus, Montreal's most holy institution stood atop its oldest crime scene. And for every act of charity within its walls, another shadow lengthened just outside the light. The city exhales winter and inhales prayer. By the middle of the 19th century, Montreal had grown into a lattice of stone parishes, muddy lanes, and ship masts stabbing at a colorless sky. Above the St. Lawrence, smoke trails from factories and kitchens. Below, the soil keeps its older promises murmurs of guilt, psalms of mercy, and the heavy quiet of the dead. The Grey Nuns are here, moving like disciplined shadows through wards and back alleys, faces framed in the same pale cloth, hands trained to bind, clean, lift, and bury. They call it charity. History will call it something harder to hold. The fever sheds. In 1847, the ships came. They arrive heavy with grief from across the Atlantic Irish families who have fled a second year of crop failure and fallen straight into typhus. 90,000 souls press toward Quebec. Montreal receives them with rough wood and quick decisions. Fever sheds rise in Point St. Charles, long rectangles of boards in desperation. Inside, heat clings to damp linens. The air tastes of vinegar, sweat, and fear. The Grey Nuns step through rows of straw mattresses, their footsteps tapping a slow liturgy on plank floors. They wipe brows, spoon broth, pray over the dying, and learn to look a mother in the eye when she asks whether her child will outlive the sun. The answer too often is no. Over nearly 2 years, the sisters labor in those sheds, keeping watch as an estimated 6,000 refugees meet in early silence in Point St. Charles. They tend not only to bodies but to fractures. Roughly 3,000 orphans, parentless by landfall, are placed out to local families by church networks. Adoption is a word rarely used, placement the gentler mask. 13 Grey Nuns themselves do not survive. 13 names recorded and lowered into the earth as if into a ledger of sacrifice women who paid for their vow with breath. The sisters' lettered accounts will remember the sound of coughing like rain on a tin roof. But Stone remembers differently. In the decades that follow, the dead accrue where charity concentrates. Within the Motherhouse complex rising in its time, but already gathering a subterranean congregation, a crypt will keep company with hundreds, nuns of the order, convent members, and others laid in orderly rows beneath the floor that will one day vibrate with student footsteps. The logic is practical: keep them close, keep them honored, keep disease contained, but proximity is its own theology. When prayer lives above, silence lives just below it. One body is later lifted out. Marguerite Duville, the foundress who died in 1771, is formally disinterred and taken back to Varennes, her birthplace. The rest do not move. Their burial is not a story meant to change. It is meant to instruct remain. There is talk that to exhume them would risk releasing sleeping illnesses, and so the crypt stands as a narrow country where the living never cross the border except to build, repair, or pray. A chapel above, a crypt below, mercy layered like lamination. The Motherhouse does not appear all at once. The first stones are set in December 1868, amid the cold arithmetic of budgets and the warm arithmetic of faith. Its principal architect, Victor Bourgeot, will become known as l'architecte des Sœurs Grises, the architect of the Grey Nuns, after shaping earlier projects for them: the chapel at the Hospice St. Joseph, the Refuge St. Brigide, and a renovation in Chateauguay. He imagines a deliberate geometry, an H-shaped plan with a chapel at its center, a cross within a letter, a city block that prays with both arms outstretched. But Montreal's history is a chronic editor. The western portion of his idealized H will never be realized. Funding, priorities, and time press hard, and blueprints become artifacts. Bourgeot dies in 1888, suddenly an accident on his way to meet the sisters. The building, unfinished by design if not by intent, absorbs the news the way old stone absorbs weather. Tragedy is not yet finished with this address. What the walls learn. By the early 1900s, the Motherhouse held multiple worlds under one roof. A hospital operates through part of the complex rows of iron beds, enamel basins, a medicine cabinet that smells of carbolic soap and hope. Nearby, an orphanage shelters infants and children, small boots in neat pairs, alphabet cards thumbed to softness, lullabies taught like catechism. Between floors, the building stratifies need. On one level, recovering soldiers, young men with bandages like new maps. On the level above, orphaned children, souls who do not yet know how to spell the absence they carry. An institution becomes a single body, nerves, bell ropes, veins, corridors, lungs, stairwells, heart, chow. What enters the mouth, work, meals, prayers must come to rest somewhere else. In this body, the crypt is the stomach that never empties. At Vespers, the sisters' voices rise in a disciplined swell. The hymn glides along the plaster and timber, down the column cores, into cavities where dust hangs in the slanted light like unfallen snow. Stone keeps its own hymnal and index of footfalls, the scrape of chair legs, the choreographed hush of a ward falling asleep. Montreal knows fire the way a sailor knows wind. The sisters have already watched a previous hospital burn 1,765, a blaze that ran 5 blocks from Rue de Saint-Sacrement to the Hôpital Général, leaving 3 dead and 215 families suddenly roofless. Ash is memory made visible. You can brush it away. You cannot make it forget what it once was. The Motherhouse bears that old lesson inside its walls like a vaccine that never fully takes. Buckets, ladders, precautions, yes. But the city's age is written in wood grain, and winter turns beams brittle. On the 14th of February 1918, Montreal opens an ordinary morning. Somewhere, a baker dusts his hands. On a nearby street, a horse refuses a patch of ice. Inside the Motherhouse, the day's first feedings have finished. Nursery workers settle the very young infants and toddlers, many under 4 years old, into a rhythm of breathing and small noises. Up one flight, convalescing soldiers relearn the arts of being alive. Among the staff is Berthe Courtemanche, hired only 6 weeks earlier. She is new enough that her name still sounds borrowed on the tongue of the building, new enough that her footsteps do not yet have an echo in the corridor. No one who says good morning will know that this day will split their lives into before and after. First, though, the quiet. A nun straightens a crib sheet, a nurse counts bottles, a child's cry resolves, then loosens back into sleep. The chapel bell marks the hour. The note moves down the spine of the building and disappears into a place beyond wood and brick. What happens next is not yet visible, but it is inevitable. Outside, the calendar insists it is still World War I. The Motherhouse has already learned to speak the language of triage, pallor, pulse, and prognosis. On one floor, the soldiers breathe as if their chests have forgotten the pattern. On the floor above, the children breathe because they have not yet learned to stop. A building can bear this only so long. And in a hallway where few will later agree on the exact details, the spark takes its chance. No one begins a day intending to meet catastrophe at the corner of duty and chance. But that is where the corridor is leading now, a junction of doors, an open flame in the wrong place, a series of decisions that will later be given official names: investigation, trial, fitness to stand so that the human mind has somewhere to put the unspeakable. For the moment, there is only the simplest physics. Heat seeks air, fire looks for food. Nursery blankets and curtains are made to be soft, not to resist flame. The first tongue of fire will look like curiosity, the second will look like intent. The Grey Nuns have moved through wars, plagues, and famines. They have washed bodies burned by fever, named children that nobody claimed, and written letters to families whose grief had no other courier. They know what to do when a chest stills. What they do not know, what no one in this building yet knows, is what to do when every hallway becomes a verdict. The day is about to answer them. The air inside the Motherhouse thickens long before anyone sees flame. Somewhere along the nursery corridor, cloth catches, a thread of smoke curls toward the ceiling, and the quiet begins to change shape. At first, the sisters think it's a stove flue. A moment later, the bell rope jerks in the sacristy, an urgent rhythm that no prayer ever used. By the time the nearest nun reaches the doorway, the hall glows a dull orange, like sunrise forced into a tunnel. Sound arrives all at once, shouts, a child's cry, the scrape of boots on stone. Within seconds, smoke is crawling across the ceiling, rolling faster than thought. The fire moves with purpose, finding oxygen, finding memory. Downstairs, soldiers still recovering from war injuries hear the alarms before they understand the words. They rise anyway, bandaged arms, crutches, improvised strength, and rush upward into the heat. They are not rescuers by assignment, only by reflex. The first doors they open lead to rooms already impossible to enter. The walls breathe light, wooden beams pop like knuckles under pressure. A sister wraps her shawl around her mouth, gropes through smoke, lifts a child into her arms, and turns toward the stairwell. Another follows, holding 2 infants against her chest, eyes closed against the sting. Outside, the February air cuts like glass. Flames punch through the roof, sparks leap toward the cross above the chapel. Residents of the city gather in the street, neighbors, passers-by, men from nearby fire brigades still pulling on coats. Buckets form lines, ladders scrape stone, hoses roar, but the heat beats them back. Inside, minutes stretch into hours. By dawn, the Motherhouse's nursery wing has collapsed inward, a black skeleton where lullabies once lived. When the smoke finally surrenders, the counting begins. More than 60 children, all under 4 years old, are gone. The city's papers print the number, not the names. To remember them all would require space that the columns do not have. Soldiers and sisters stumble into daylight, soot-streaked, their faces identical in disbelief. They saved dozens tiny forms wrapped in blankets, laid in rows across the courtyard, but the silence between each cry tells the rest. Investigators trace the origin back to one room, one worker. Berthe Cordemanche, 20 years old, was hired in December 1917. The inquiry cannot agree on motive. Evidence suggests deliberation. The conclusion, arson. Her trial begins before the year ends. Witnesses describe her as distracted, detached, sometimes whispering apologies to no one visible. Before a verdict can form, doctors pronounce her unfit to stand trial. She is sent to Hôpital Saint-Jean-de-Dieu, a psychiatric asylum on Montreal's eastern edge. There she spends 10 years, a patient the records call quiet, her body weakening under tuberculosis and cachexia, the wasting disease that erases both muscle and identity. In 1928, she died in her cell, and the official note closes the page. The Motherhouse rebuilds. New wings rise over old foundations. Burnt beams are replaced. Corridors regain their symmetry. But the sound of children in the chapel, laughter echoing where none should exist, becomes part of the building's folklore. During evening prayer, sisters report a faint rustle, as if dozens of small hands were turning pages together. At night, watchmen claim to hear a woman's voice soft, repetitive, caught between lullaby and confession. The order records no official haunting. They note only atmospheric noises. But the city remembers. Montreal carries its tragedies in whispers. Decades move on. The century turns again. After World War II, the Grey Nuns looked outward missions in Africa and South America, their numbers shrinking even as their reach expanded. Faith, administration, and the quiet expectation of obedience hold them together. Yet the walls they leave behind are heavier each year, packed with the weight of remembered smoke. By 1959, the church began to polish the memory of its founder. Marguerite Douville is beatified, a step towards sainthood. The process was completed in 1990. Her portrait hangs in cathedrals, serene, unburned, distant from the soot that still stains the basement stone of the Motherhouse. Holiness and history rarely keep the same accounting. The building itself becomes a paradox, half convent, half hospital, half tomb. Even as its population dwindles, the structure remains exact, H-shaped, symmetrical, impossible to forget. In winter, frost patterns on the chapel windows sometimes form crosses inside circles, as if the glass were remembering blueprints left unfinished. Caretakers mention the chill that lingers near the nursery wing, colder than any draft should be. They blame faulty vents, Electricians disagree. Neither stays long after dusk. By 2004, the Grey Nuns knew their time in the Motherhouse is ending. They negotiate a sale. Concordia University will purchase the property for $18 million. When the final sisters depart in 2012, prayers echo one last time through corridors lined with portraits whose eyes never seem to close. Renovation crews arrive the next year, stripping paint, wiring new lights, and opening sealed doors that have not moved in decades. Some workers report finding old rosaries tangled behind walls, children's toys wedged under floorboards, and singed hymn books fused by heat. When they work late, tools go missing. A faint, burning smell, absent 1 second, sharp the next wafts from no identifiable source. The Grey Nuns go on record as a force for benevolence, nurses, teachers, and missionaries. But beneath the praise lies the longer accounting their role in slavery, colonial expansion, and residential schools across Canada. The Motherhouse, rebuilt over its own ashes, remains the physical archive of that contradiction. And deep below, in the crypt that no one disturbs, the air stays still. No flame, no sound, only the pressure of memory suspended between stone and time. The war ends, but peace never really finds the building. Outside, the world begins to modernize cars, neon, television, a language of progress. Inside the Motherhouse, the Grey Nuns hold to the rhythm that has always sustained them: prayer at dawn, service at noon, silence at dusk. Yet the empire of charity they have built stretches far beyond Montreal now. From 1945 onward, missions multiply Africa, South America, the far north of Canada. Wherever the church sends its agents of salvation, the sisters follow. They teach, they nurse, they translate pain into obedience. What they cannot see or will not see is that their gospel carries a second message, one of erasure. The colonial state is expanding westward, and with it come residential schools, institutions built to civilize indigenous children by separating them from everything that once named them. The Grey Nuns administer many of these schools. Records will later list more than a dozen, each marked by the same structure: dormitory, chapel, classroom, punishment hall. The system runs on two economies: faith and silence. Children arrive by train, canoe, or truck. They are lined up, shorn, and renamed. Their languages are banned, their memories are corrected. In these classrooms, holiness means forgetting. Food is often spoiled, and medicine is scarce. Disease circulates through dormitories faster than prayer can catch it. When a cough goes quiet, the body is buried nearby, a wooden cross marking a number instead of a name. At Street Anne's Indian Residential School in northeastern Ontario, testimonies collected decades later describe an object that should never exist in a place of faith: an electric chair. Survivors remember being forced to sit in it while a current pulsed through their small bodies. No one agrees on why the chair was used. Everyone agrees on the fear it taught. Elsewhere, Children speak of a whip called the Cat of Nine Tails, 9 strands tipped with metal that left marks across their backs. One survivor, Chris Metatawabin, tells investigators the steel things in it could rip you apart. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg later verifies at least 89 child deaths at Holy Angels Indian Residential School in Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, another institution staffed by the Grey Nuns. 89 small silences enter the national record. While these tragedies unfold in distant provinces, Montreal still sees the sisters as icons of mercy. Hospitals bear their name. Patients call them Sœurs de la Charité. Few understand the scope of their labor or the cost extracted from those under it. To the public, the Grey Nuns are tireless. To history, they are divided, half light, half absence. By the 1962nd, the order was aging. New recruits are few. Classrooms once filled with novitiates echo with empty chairs. Yet the institution endures, carried forward by habit more than by hope. In remote missions, rumors begin to surface, stories whispered between former students, teachers, and local priests. Officials dismiss them as exaggerations. The church requests discretion. Silence remains the most practiced sacrament. But paper keeps better secrets than people do. Government inspectors note disciplinary irregularities. Journalists stumble upon sealed files. The first lawsuits appear like hairline cracks in stained glass. By the 1992nd, the facade finally splinters. The Ontario Provincial Police opens a massive inquiry into Street Anne's residential school. Over 700 victims and witnesses are interviewed. 74 suspects are identified, 7 are charged, 5 are convicted. For the survivors, conviction is not closure, it is simply the moment someone else finally believes them. For the Grey Nuns, it is the first public shadow on a habit that once looked untouchable. The investigation files, thousands of pages, are sealed by law. In 2022, survivors petitioned the Supreme Court of Canada to release them. The court declines. The documents remain locked, and the ghosts remain paper-thin. Meanwhile, the government negotiated the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement in 2006. The Grey Nuns pledged to raise $25 million as part of the Catholic entity's total of $79 million owed to survivors. 9 years later, in 2015, the Canadian government quietly releases those entities from the obligation. No further money changes hands. 2 years before the settlement, the order had already sold the Motherhouse to Concordia University for $18 million. On paper, it is a simple real estate transaction. In spirit, it is a trade of ghosts. The university inherits the most haunted square of ground in Montreal. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the sisters' numbers dwindle toward a whisper. Habit fabric grows rare, dormitories empty. In the chapel, candles flicker against portraits of women who once ruled continents of compassion. Their successors now walk more slowly, carrying both pride and apology in the same heartbeat. The last generation of Grey nuns to live inside the Motherhouse will see computers arrive, cars hum along René Lévesque Boulevard, and news stories question the very foundations of their history. They keep praying anyway. Every morning, as sunlight crosses the pews, the air seems to hum faintly, half hymn, half static. Whether it is memory, guilt, or the residue of so many voices pressing upward from the crypt, no one can say. By the turn of the millennium, the building stands more as a relic than a residence. Dust gathers on polished banisters, paint peels around window frames like the pages of a forgotten book. When Concordia scouts first toured the site, they note its symmetry, its grandeur, and the faint, inexplicable drop in temperature that follows them from room to room. They plan renovations, not exorcisms. The deal closes, the papers were signed, the curse waits. The city moves on, but the building does not. René Lévesque Boulevard hums with traffic, cafes glow in the night, students hurry between classes. Yet inside the old stone Motherhouse, the air stays 1 century behind. Dust still breathes in the corners, and every footstep seems to arrive a second before it should. When Concordia University completes its purchase in 2007, the plan is straightforward: a student residence, modern, bright, practical. The last Grey nuns will remain until 2012, after which the rooms will be cleared, rewired, and repainted. But history has never accepted renovation as absolution. Construction begins early in 2013. Workers pry open sealed doorways, remove rusted radiators, and discover forgotten closets filled with prayer books, rosaries, and infant shoes. Some items are carefully cataloged, others simply vanish between shifts. When the jackhammers reach the basement chapel, their echoes sound less like tools and more like replies. No one is supposed to enter the crypt below the chapel. Behind a locked iron gate lie hundreds of coffins stacked in orderly rows, the remains of sisters who died in service, many from typhus and smallpox. Their names are etched on tin plaques, dull with age. Because of health regulations and ancient fears of contagion, the coffins have never been moved. They remain sealed, a population of the past beneath a population of the present. Students later say that the crypt feels alive, as if air rises through the floor vents, carrying whispers. Late at night, they hear what sounds like the turn of a rosary or the creak of a pew. Sometimes, when the chapel lights dim, the shadows seem to breathe. By 2014, the refurbished Grey Nuns building, now called the GN Residence, welcomed its first residents, 600 students from around the world. They unpack laptops, hang posters, and plug in desk lamps. Few know they are sleeping above a crypt. The first reports come quietly. A student on the 4th floor wakes to footsteps in the hallway at 3 a.m., but the security cameras show no one. Another claims she hears a lullaby, an old French melody floating through her vent whenever it rains. When she hums it aloud, her roommate says it sounds like a prayer for the dying. Maintenance staff start joking about the nuns on night shift, but humor fades when tools go missing and reappear in locked rooms. Elevators stall between floors with no mechanical explanation. Campus electricians replace bulbs that keep dimming only in the old nursery wing. A journalism major records a podcast about the residence. She interviews classmates who describe hearing children's laughter near the laundry room and doors that open without hinges creaking. When she edits the audio later, she finds a faint female voice under one interview whispering, "Je suis ici, I am here." Others report colder rooms toward the chapel side. Thermometers dip 5 degrees in minutes, then the warmth returns as if exhaled. Campus security writes it off as airflow from the vents, except the vents in those halls are sealed. Some residents leave offerings, candles, notes, small coins along the stairwell near the crypt gate. They say it keeps the building quiet at night. Others laugh, but the same laughter always fades when they walk alone after midnight. The ghost stories reach Concordia's student newspaper, The Link. Reporters visit, expecting exaggeration. Instead, they leave with pages of consistent testimonies, voices, shapes, cold spots, the sound of someone praying. They published the article under a headline equal parts curiosity and caution, "Did you hear that? Or am I going crazy?" Even administrators admit the crypt exists but insist it's sealed for respect and safety. That statement satisfies no one. When nights grow long in exam season, whispers pass through the residence like drafts. "Don't study near the chapel after 2 a.m. That's when the lights flicker. Don't take the old elevator alone. If you hear a lullaby, pray back." Each generation of students adds its own chapter to the haunting. One draws a map marking where she felt unseen eyes watching. Another paints a mural of faceless nuns surrounded by children holding candles. Art professors call it therapeutic interpretation. Locals call it remembering. In truth, the Grey Nuns Residence teaches more than any textbook inside it. It teaches that architecture remembers. That charity without reflection becomes cruelty in disguise. And that every prayer said on cursed ground becomes a kind of truce, never a pardon. Today, visitors can walk through the courtyard garden where sunlight falls gently on benches and ivy. Few realize they stand above a crypt of nearly 300 souls. Fewer still know about the unmarked grave of Jean-Baptiste Goyer, the farmer whose blood once sealed the land's first curse. From murderer to missionary, from orphan to student, the soil has absorbed them all. If you pause long enough, Montreal's heartbeat passes through the stones, distant traffic, a train horn, then something softer, perhaps a hymn, perhaps just wind. The difference is hard to prove and harder to forget. The Grey Nuns Motherhouse stands now as both university residence and memorial, proof that time does not erase what it builds upon. Its walls hold the laughter of students and the prayers of nuns, the weeping of orphans, and the command of history to remember. When asked about the hauntings, Concordia's spokesperson offers a diplomatic answer. We will be revising those pages soon. Perhaps that is the truest response possible. Acknowledge, revise, never erase. And as night folds again over downtown Montreal, one can still imagine the faint ring of a chapel bell. It doesn't mark time anymore. It marks persistence, the echo of lives that refuse to disappear. This has been a true account of the Haunted Grey Nuns Residence in Montreal. Every story on Fact TV comes from real places, real records, and the lingering energy that history leaves behind. If you ever walk the halls of Concordia's GN building, listen closely. You may hear a prayer that never finished or a child's voice asking who turned off the light. Thank you for watching Fact TV, where the past is never silent. Until next time, remember, ghosts are just history, refusing to stay quiet.